Okay, this will be brief. That squeaking noise you hear in the background is Francois Pierre, and he is chewing on one of his squeaky toys in a deliberate attempt to interrupt this podcast because he knows I'm going to say something with which he disagrees, and because he can't argue the merits of his positions because they have no merit, he resorts to these rather nefarious tactics. I'm used to them. Hopefully you won't let that interfere with listening to what I have to say. So, what's with George Soros and the Republicans' obsession with him? Yeah, a lot of people, you wonder, why does he get so angry at Republicans? Well, I'll tell you why. Because when I was growing up, used to watch these House Un-American Activities Committee, where the Republicans, that was entirely controlled by Republicans, and they did everything they could to destroy the reputations and lives of people with whom they disagreed. And particularly they had this thing called the Hollywood Purge or Witch Hunt. And they'd bring all these actors in and say, were you ever a member of this group? Or did you know somebody, did you have a friend who was a member of that group? And they always brought it back to painting these people with pro-communist views or whatever. Basically it's called guilt by association. And they did that all the time to ruin people's reputations. Then along came Joe McCarthy. And Joe McCarthy is famous for McCarthyism, which was him setting out to destroy people's reputations, again, calling them all communists and accusing the State Department of being filled with communists. And finally, they had the Army McCarthy hearings, where McCarthy hauled people in front of him and tried to ruin their reputations, and eventually the whole thing blew up in McCarthy's face. He then was censured by the Senate finally, and was I've got this little fiend down here with this squeaky bone that he wants me to take from him. Stop it! This is important stuff we're talking about. Yes, we're talking about the Army McCarthy hearings. Moron! He wasn't even alive during the Army McCarthy hearings. So I should probably get off. This is not going to stop for a while. This will come to no good end. I'm so sorry. But anyway, real quick before he starts squeaking again, they're doing the same thing with George Soros. And they're talking about this Alvin Bragg in New York bringing these charges against Trump. And to a person, the Republicans criticizing him refer to him as the Soros-backed prosecutor from Manhattan, district attorney. The Soros-backed. Well, if you didn't know anything, which apparently many of their supporters don't, you would think that Soros was a mafia don and that he had this prosecutor in his hip pocket and the whole thing was a big giant criminal enterprise. Well, George Soros is a Greek international financier. He's worth billions. Nobody's claiming he didn't earn those billions legitimately, but he also sponsors liberal causes, particularly as it relates to things like the environment. So anytime the Republicans don't like somebody, they say, oh, he's backed by George Soros, which by the way they say the name means George Soros is a bad guy, not somebody who sponsors things with which they disagree politically, particularly when it comes to things like the environment, where the Republicans just rake in dough from the oil companies. And Soros is a legitimate counterpoise to all the money that the Republicans get from the oil companies, where they run to do their bidding constantly. But this is just so typical of that party. This was the party of Richard Nixon. And I remember when Richard Nixon was running around with Madam Chiang Kai-shek and General MacArthur, trashing Truman all over the place, saying he had sold out to the communists. And you know why they said he sold out to the communists? Just a quick digression. Read the book about Charlie Song, S-O-N-G. Very fascinating part of the Chinese history. But Charlie Song's son, Charlie Song Jr., was the was the brother-in-law of Chiang Kai-shek. And he was the treasurer of that government in exile that was set up when Chiang fled mainland China and took over Taiwan. And we were pouring billions of dollars into supporting the army of Chiang Kai-shek, and that money was going right to the treasury, to the treasurer, who was Charlie Sung Jr., and he was putting it in his own bank account. So at that point in time, he was the richest man in the world. And so Truman said, enough of this stuff, and he cut that out. And when that happened, boy, all hell broke loose. And that's why they kept saying that Truman gave China to the communists. Of course, by that time, Chiang was over in Taiwan, and Mao had solidly established himself in communist China, and the money that we took back from Charlie Song's personal account and didn't take it back, we stopped giving it to him, had nothing to do with the communist takeover in China. That was already done. It was a fait accompli. So that was that typical of that kind of thing. They attacked Truman all the time, so he was a communist. And that was MacArthur, and it was Truman and Madam Chiang ran around, the three of them, appearing in every Republican organization that they could find. So it's just been this constant thing of attacking people's reputations, guilt by association, and now they're doing it again with George Soros, who is, as far as I know, an innocuous person. Now, some people are saying, well, this reference to George Soros is anti-Semitism, and it's reminiscent of the Nazis and Hitler talking about the Jewish bankers. I don't think that's true, and we should just leave the Nazis out of everything. But it is true that they just say his name like it was inherently an evil thing to say. And it's ridiculous, and it's just more of the same. And frankly, this is one of the reasons, one of the several reasons, but I think the prime reason that I grew up really disliking the Republicans. I first became aware of politics in 1948. My dad introduced me to Harry Truman, who had recently appointed my dad to the U.S. Attorney's Office. And so I followed that campaign, even though I was quite young. I was only 73 at the time. But I followed that campaign, and I've been interested in politics ever since. And I really have seen the Republicans engage in these attacks, these personal attacks, these ad hominem attacks, we call them. I was an altar boy, so I speak Latin fluently. And that's all I have to say now. I've got to take care of that stupid dog, and I don't know what he's up to now.